I want to review the idea of Java variables with you to help you hopefully get a better understanding of what they are and how we use them. So first of all, I want you to think of the word variable as the components of the word, which it has able in it and it has vary in it. So that means that variables are something that are able to vary or to change. And we actually set a memory location when we're going to create a variable. So when we declare a variable, a memory location gets set in our program. And we name it, and we can use that memory location later on when we want to use them. We just have to call them back up. So how do you declare a variable? Well, when you declare a variable, you're going to give it a meaningful name. So again, that's just an industry standard that everyone follows because you want your code to be readable and you want people to understand what is being held in that variable location, that memory location, without having to really read your code in great detail. It should just make sense just by looking at it. So as you can see here, I have an integer and I've named it hour. So I'm sure you're all thinking it's probably time that's being held in that field, and you know it's the hour component of time. So when you declare the statement, you have to give it the type of variable. So we have an int type here, which is an integer type. There's a space, then you name the identifier or the variable name, and then you end with a semicolon. So this statement right here sets the name and location of that particular variable. Now you want to obviously assign values to it. So this is something that's called an assignment statement, and assignment statements are where you set the value. So we have hour equals 11. So you notice over in the picture that now there's the 11, the value going into that memory location. And so again, an assignment statement sets the value of the variable. Now there's something that you can do to do both, because if you want to save time when you're programming, maybe you're going to declare the variable and assign the value at the same time. So here's an example of what that would look like. So you would have the type, space, the name, space, the assignment operator, the value you want, and then a semicolon. So this statement sets the name, location, and value all at the same time. Now because we know that variables are able to change, you can change the value. So you can use an assignment statement to change the value of something that you've already set and it already has a particular number in it. So since we're using hour as an example, I changed the hour to 12 because the time changed. So this sets the value of the variable again, but there was a value before which is no longer there, and so now we have the new value of 12. So there is another time-saving factor where you can declare variables, multiple variables at once. So this is a statement that would create 3 memory locations at once. So again, it's still an integer type. This would get me to get the hour, minute, and second, which makes more sense to have than just the hour for time. So you get all 3 made at once. So you can declare lots of variables at once, and you would just separate the names of your variables, and then you'd end it with a semicolon. So we're going to be doing a lot with primitive variable types. So we are working with an object-oriented language, and most of what we're dealing with in Java are going to be objects, but there's also a lot of primitive variable types that we're going to use when we're making our objects. So we need to understand what primitive variable types are, and there are 8 different primitive variable types in Java. We're only going to really deal with 4 of them for our code. So the ones that we're going to be dealing with, 2 of them relate to numbers. And those are over here in green. We have one that is a Boolean, and we have text. So we're going to go in more depth into these types, but I just want to give you an overview. So for numbers, you can either have an integer or you can have a double. So the difference between these two, an integer is a whole number. It can be negative or it can be positive. So if you think of the number line, anything on that number line you can use as long as it's not a fractional value. Once you have a fractional value, you're going to move over to a double. And so those are numbers with decimals in them or a fraction. So anything that's a fraction, you're going to use a double. And they can also be negative or positive. So there's an example down there of a number line. So just to review, there's an integer type or a double type. And this is how you declare an integer type, int for integer, the variable name, assignment operator, value, semicolon. If you have a double, double is the type, you have the variable name, you have the equal sign, and then you have the value that you're assigning it to. So this equal sign does not mean, this is an assignment operator, and then you have the value you want it to be, and then the semicolon. So those are the ones that relate to numbers. Now, since we have numbers, then we know we can do operations, which we've practiced. And so you can use addition, subtraction, multiplication, or division. And as we know in math that we've learned since very young ages, we have to follow the order of operations. So I'm going to give a quick review of that. So PEMDAS, this is the order. So parentheses, exponents, multiplication and division, and then addition and subtraction. So multiplication and division and addition and subtraction you can see are together in the same box because they have the same level. So then it depends which comes first in your equation. So whatever comes first, left to right, that's going to be done first. And so you need to understand this if you're going to write lines of code so that you can check to make sure you're getting the correct value you want. So sometimes some of our errors don't relate to the programming, but actually relate to the human error that we've designed an incorrect formula. So you want to make sure you know how to use PEMDAS. All right, this primitive variable type is called a Boolean. And that's probably something that you're not very familiar with, but it's a variable that holds only two values. So you'll understand the concepts behind it. It can either be true or false. So for this example down here is an example of when I would use a Boolean. So this was an example from what I would consider a bank to use. So there's a Boolean value called cash check. And so this value is going to say true if you can cash the check and false if you can't. So that makes sense. And it's going to be equal to, and there's parentheses in here, so we're going to do what's in the parentheses first. There are two different variable fields here. So, and it's going to be, this is a comparison operator. So Booleans use comparison operators, and it's going to compare the value. So if someone gives you a check, if you worked and you get your paycheck, and you go to the bank is going to look at that check value, and it's going to say, is that check greater than the balance in your account? And if that is true, if the check is greater than the balance of your account, then they're going to say, no way, I'm not going to cash your check. That's going to be a false statement because you're going to overdraw the account, so they're not going to do that. This could obviously have been written in a different way. It could have been check less than, and you'd be looking for the true value. So it just depends how you write the statement, what's going to populate here. So those comparison operators that I just talked about, so they usually relate to, they're going to come back, if you use the comparison operators, you're using them with Boolean, so it's going to come back as either true or false. So there are three ways that you can modify. They're called logical operators. So there's not. So if you put an exclamation point in front of the comparison, then it's going to say that means not. So you can get the opposite of something. An or statement, so sometimes it can be either or. So if I said you can have the donut or the candy bar, but you can't have both sweet treats today, then I'd use the or, which are the two straight lines. And there's also an and. Maybe it's Halloween, and I can say you can pick from this bucket of candy that has, fruit flavored, and you can pick one of the chocolate flavored candies. So, and then I would use the double ampersands for that comparison. So the comparison operators, which are ways to compare the Booleans, so something is equal. If it's checking if something's equal to, it's double equal sign. And that's because, do you remember that we use the single equal sign as an assignment operator? So that way, if we're checking to see if something equals the same, so if you're comparing two fields, equals is really two equal signs. So that's a little bit confusing when you first program. Not equal to is exclamation and then the equal sign. Then we have less than and greater than, and you remember that I always think of the alligators, they have the teeth open, so that's like the bigger side. So if you read it from left to right, the little side's here, so that's less than, and then this one has the big mouth open, so that's the greater than. Then there's also less than or equal to, and greater than or equal to. So those are the 6 comparison operators. Our final primitive variable type is character, and that's a variable that holds an individual character. You would put a primitive variable inside single quotes and know that it can only contain a single letter or symbol. How you would declare it is you need to put char space, then you name the variable. So this one happens to be named first initial. You do the assignment operator of equals, and then finally you put the character in single quotes. And just to review, you saw this in the beginning. So integers, this is how you would declare one. These are whole numbers, negative or positive. Double can be anything that has a decimal value, and this is how you declare one. Boolean can either be true or false, and the character type is just a single character or symbol.